We are with Samuel Gregg. He's the Director of Research of the Acton Institute. He is a moral philosopher from Oxford University, has written extensively on political and moral philosophy. And we are going to talk this morning about liberalism and faith. Of course, these topics are for basic concern of us. And so, Sam, welcome to Guatemala.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
We were talking about the situation of the Catholic Church in these times. I was telling you that, in my perspective, these are not good times to be a Christian, especially because of the accusations of the scandals for the hierarchy and some clerics. And so, how does a liberal and a Christian react about that? Because maybe he feels that he should take a defensive position, and he's not going to pursue the invitation to freedom, because there is a tendency for the left to take the flag of the majorities of the democracy. And at least I can see that in Guatemala. And some people, liberals, are becoming conservative liberals. But the accusation is that they don't care enough for the poor and the masses. So what is the position of a Christian and a liberal as we are? What do you think about that?
Well, let's talk about the question of the scandals within the church. And we're really talking about the Catholic Church.
Yeah, basically.
Although it is true that you find similar scandals throughout the world with other Christian confessions. There's been, for example, a major scandal with the Baptist Church in the United States just recently. So this is not something that's a specifically Catholic problem or even a Christian problem, but there's no question that the Catholic Church is the epicenter of this. And I think there's a couple of things we need to think about. The first is we have to recognize that as Christians, we believe there is this thing called sin.
Yes.
And all of us are sinners.
Yes.
And the fact that someone is a member of the clergy, if they're a minister, or a pastor, a preacher, or bishop for that matter, or even a cardinal.
Or even a cardinal. Yes.
They're not somehow perfect human beings. So in one sense, Christians should not be surprised by sin. We shouldn't be surprised that people in positions of authority within the church do bad things. That's been going on from the very beginning of the history of Christianity and the Christian church. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is that one of the reasons we are outraged when we hear these accounts of these terrible things that have been done is because we recognize that they are against everything that we believe. Everything we believe about the dignity of the human person, everything we believe when it comes to the moral life and the calling of what it means to be a good person. So in many respects, what we're seeing, the outrage, is really a Christian outrage against people doing things that are deeply contrary to the message of Jesus Christ. So it's a good reminder for us that the principles that we say we live by are things that we should expect ourselves to live by, as well as those members of the church who are occupying particular positions of authority within the church. So I think that's very important. A third thing I think we need to do is that we shouldn't be defending people who are credibly accused and found guilty of doing some of these things. We're not in the position of just defending an institution for the sake of defending an institution. In fact, I think some of the worst mistakes have been made when Catholics and other Christians have defended these sorts of things, or tried to hide them, or tried to cover them up, or tried to shield the church from some sort of public scrutiny in this regard.
Yes.
A fourth thing I should say, I think, which is very important, is that I think we should be viewing this as an opportunity to clean house.
Sure.
By which I mean several things. One is to identify the causes of the problem. And I think there are several causes of the problem. One, of course, is the problem of moral laxity within the church, which I think became very pronounced in the 1960s and 1970s. Bad moral theology, bad moral philosophy. I think another problem, frankly, is the number of homosexuals in the priesthood. 80% of the abuse cases that we've seen in, for example, in the United States have been cases of homosexual abuse. There's no other way to describe it.
Okay.
We should be asking some serious questions about what this means about the priesthood, the seminaries, and also those who are in charge of seminaries, most notably, of course, bishops. I also think another thing we should be doing is not somehow diluting the church's moral teaching on these subjects. The point is to remind people that the moral teaching is there because it's about the way of living a dignified, upright Christian life. So the point is not to reduce the moral teaching or muddy the moral teaching of the church in response to this crisis. It's to remind people that it's true and that we're all expected to live up to it. If people were living up to the church's moral teaching, we would not be having these types of problems.
Okay.
So that's the church situation.
Okay. And particularly, I want to ask you, because you are Australian by, what is the situation of the accusation to Cardinal Pell? What do you think about that?
Well, I think what we're seeing now is the judicial process working its way through the charges and arguments that have been brought against him. I personally find the charges incredible. I find them very hard to believe. But we're seeing the judicial process deal with that. I have good reason to believe that the way that this has been done has been very unjust. There are plenty of people who are non-Catholics in Australia who will say the same thing. People who are even quite hostile to the church, who have grave reservations about the process that's been used in this particular case. That being said, there's no question that the issue of sexual abuse has gravely damaged the reputation of the Catholic Church in Australia. It's also damaged, by the way, the reputation of pretty much any organization that has anything to do with children. So that includes not just the Catholic Church, but other Christian organizations, other Christian schools, organizations like the Boy Scouts, even teachers, for example. So I think it's very important when we think about this question of sexual abuse. We need to remember that, yes, it has manifested itself in the Catholic Church, and this is a grave error and shame for the Catholic Church, but it's a wider problem that goes outside the Catholic Church, and we should not lose sight of the fact that this issue of sexual abuse is very widespread throughout the world, and it's not just a Catholic problem. In fact, if we treat it as just a Catholic problem, then we're not doing justice to those instances where it occurs outside the Catholic world.
I don't know how much time do we have yet. Is enough for that? Okay, I have some other questions, but okay. Yeah, my final question would be, I have some friends that recognize the role that Christianity has played in Western civilization, but they think that was in the past. I mean that you can be a liberal today and not being a Christian, not being a believer also. So it's good that the Christianity played their role in the past. But do you think the message of the faith and religion is important today in order to be a Christian? I mean, a liberal?
Sure, of course. I happen to believe that if we are serious about building free societies, we have to keep two things in mind. One is you can't cut a free society off from its past, which is, in most cases, decidedly a Christian past, and expect that that society is somehow going to survive that cutting off without some significant damage. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that I'm more convinced than ever that if you want truly free societies, if you want societies in which there is constitutionally limited government, in which there are strong property rights, in which there is a strong regime of rule of law, in which there are human rights that are protected, you need more than just utilitarian foundations for these things. And the reason I say that is because I think that utilitarian foundations will take you some way, but they can't provide a comprehensive account of why freedom matters. I happen to think that natural law philosophy provides a very strong account of why freedom matters. But I also think that you find in the wisdom, particularly of Judaism and Christianity, you find ultimate reasons for why you should have free societies. We also know that when Christianity starts to fade away, that people's attachment to freedom, I think, starts to lessen. You see this in Western Europe, for example.
Yes.
I don't think it's a mistake that you see a correlation there between the rise of statism, of collectivism, of quite pervasive forms of social democracy in the wake of the decline of Christianity. Because what happens, I think, is when Christianity goes away, human beings don't stop being religious creatures. We are homo religiosus. We can't help but ask fundamental religious questions. And when Christianity goes away, it quickly gets replaced by some particularly insidious ideologies, whether it's collectivism, whether it's gender theory, whether it's a type of radical individualism that sees things like human dignity as being nonsensical. I am not confident that free societies can long last without a strong religious foundation, which I happen to believe is most powerfully provided by Christianity. I appreciate that there are people who disagree with that, but I think that one of the great things about the Instituto Fe et Libertad is that you are encouraging serious reflection upon these questions, because I think many people are inclined to simply put these things aside, to pretend that that's the past, these things no longer matter. Actually, they really do. They really do, because when good religion goes away, it usually gets replaced by one of two things: bad religion or insidious ideologies.
Thank you very much. And Sam wrote an article, of course, for the first number of our journal, Fe y Libertad, about these topics. And he has lectured a lot about this. And so if you want to read more about these topics, we have the journal online and printed, Revista Fe y Libertad. Thank you very much.